All right, welcome everyone. I am here with Tammy Reed, and she is a certified yoga teacher who teaches here at Main Street Yoga Center. And you can catch her class on Sundays at 9:45 a.m. At least as of the time of this recording. Who knows? We may be expanding our schedule. Tammy has a very rich background in terms of understanding the body and movement. I think you'll find that this comes into her classes. And she's been teaching for quite a while here in Madison. I believe almost a decade, about.
More than a decade.
More than a decade, yeah.
I think almost 14, I think this year will be 14 years.
Yeah, a decade and a half.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I know. I was recently reflecting on the fact that it's now 20 years for me.
Wow.
Which really makes me sound old.
Yeah, I think maybe yoga's been the thing I've done the longest in my professional life.
Yeah. So I mean, speaking of your professional life, maybe that would be a good place for us to start today, just to inform some of the students, like some of the unique perspectives that you bring to your teaching.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has kind of culminated in my life is that all of my previous experiences have come together to bring me to where I am now. Way back when I was a preteen, I was heavy into ballet, and I was taking classes 6 days a week, was on the professional track, went to North Carolina School of the Arts, got injured and really wanted to go on to college, so I quit ballet. And then I ended up going to school, and I was an English teacher for 7 years in Milwaukee public schools, and stayed home with my kids. And at that time, I became a yoga teacher. I certified in Pilates, certified in teaching TRX and bars. So really just started exploring teaching things other than, or teaching through the body rather than only through the mind with English. And then when I thought about going back to work, the thought of going back to English teaching was a little bit like kind of been there, done that, and wanted a new challenge. So I went back to school to become a physical therapist assistant. And it was a grueling program, but luckily made it through. And now I'm doing physical therapy with lots of different age groups and teaching lots of different age groups, and it kind of seems like everything has come together where physical therapy and yoga are really intertwined.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to me that you talk about in early life being into movement with ballet and also into the arts, and then you go into teaching, and to me, like, that's the epitome of a lot of what yoga is, which is sort of an art, movement, and here you are teaching it and leading it.
Yeah, it seems to have brought all the different parts of me together. And ballet, as beautiful of an art form as it is, it's brutal on the body, and but there's that joy in the movement that's hard to get in other forms. But with yoga, it really gave me all of the good stuff that ballet had to offer, and none of the bad stuff. So there's a discipline to our practice because we practice and we go to class and we explore and we experiment. And there are those beautiful moments when you really are in the moment with your body in this space that's kind of magical. And then because of the training of yoga, we don't push into pain and we don't make our body contort into strange positions or bloody our feet. And yeah, it's just been a beautiful exploration. And I think the other thing about yoga is that it is intellectual. There's this whole history of thought and practice and how suggestions of how to live our lives, that it gets our mind, our bodies, our intellect, our soul all at the same time.
Uh-huh.
So it never gets boring.
Yeah, like unifying it all together. Yeah, I mean, speaking of unifying things together, one of the things that's standing out to me as you're describing it is, so in ballet, you're almost describing, from what I'm hearing, like this almost extreme form of an externally based kind of physical movement and work, and ballet may be a little more extreme than the way most people encounter this, which is maybe through something like fitness,
Right.
where the goal is external, like how fast can I run, how far can I run, how much can I lift, how many reps can I lift. Like a lot of the focus is on achieving something external. Mm-hmm. And through that work externally, there's a couple things that happen. One is you do make some internal gains, like you build stronger muscle, you relieve stress, you have, just a little bit more heart health. Like there are internal gains that come out of that process. However, on the other hand, as you pointed out with ballet, and ballet again may be a more extreme version of this, because you're trying to create an external aesthetic in ballet, which is obviously very difficult to do, and you have to undergo intense training to be able to achieve that aesthetic. And a lot of times that externalness, whether it is trying to run faster or run longer or do, I don't know ballet that well, but like do the perfect pirouette or whatever that it happens to be, like it can be oftentimes at the sacrifice of internal health and wellness. And mm-hmm. to me, like one of the things that makes yoga different than fitness is that we start from inside the body to begin with. Mm-hmm. And where it's almost a bridge between maybe something like physical therapy and something that's more fitnessy, in the sense that, like, oftentimes I think we divide our conceptions of, like, therapy is for when you get hurt and you do these series of movements to no longer be hurt anymore. And then fitness is that thing that we do once we're not hurt. But then oftentimes there is that component of I end up sacrificing something and I get hurt and I have to fall back into therapy again. And yes. What I think is important about well done yoga is that it takes on that these two worlds don't have to be that separate. Like, you can do things in a way that integrates both the best of what therapeutic sort of movement has to offer, where you're building from the ground up the weak spots in the body, and then doing so in a way that you don't have to be like doing these kind of simple, boring sort of, I mean, maybe I'm being mean to the physical therapists out there, but yeah, I mean, it can still be from the ground up, building more overall integrative strength than say getting knocked all the way back to having to be exclusively in a therapeutic mode.
Yeah, I think one of the big differences between fitness models and ballet is that there is that outward aesthetic or goal, and you keep trying to achieve that, oftentimes at sacrificing health, mm-hmm. mentally, physically. And with yoga, it's not our bodies fit the pose, it's that we make the pose fit in our bodies. So it's that acceptance of where our bodies can move and where they just physically can't because of our bony structures. And with yoga, I think what's so beautiful is that the accessibility of it to everyone. And, you know, everyone can get into a warrior too. But then as we deepen our practice, as we keep coming back, the expression of our warrior two and what we access in our warrior two changes over time. And it's that constant exploration. Well, what happens if I tighten this muscle? What happens if I loosen this muscle? What does it feel like if I go deeper? What does it feel like if I come out of it? So it's that constant exploration starting on the outside, but it's always moving inward, and then sometimes it starts inward and moves outward, and there's that flow between the two that I think makes the practice so special and different from other forms of physical activity.
Yeah, I'm wondering if I take on the role of someone who maybe I just want to come in and kind of get my yoga done, like, you know, I feel good when I'm done. Like, what would you say to someone in this position in terms of, like, what's interesting about, or like what's the benefit of sort of playing with a pose like Warrior Two in that way that you described? Like, where does that go?
You know, I think when, you know, we all start as beginners, and I think when someone comes in and they just want to be in their Warrior Two and they feel good when they leave, that's a beautiful thing, and we all start there, and then we don't know why is yoga working on us? Why do I feel happy? You know, no matter what's going on in life, I always feel happy after yoga. And it's not like I'm just glad I'm done with yoga. It's like it brings out our happiness. And I think as people come and just be in their poses and, you know, talking about the exploring of, you know, we have these bodies and they're amazing, amazing things that that we have full use of our bodies is just a miracle every day, because there are so many people who don't have full use of their bodies. And to explore those nooks and crannies. Like when we're doing you know, I bike a lot. And when you're biking, you know, it's your legs, it's your core, you feel certain things, but you're only moving in one plane, and you're accessing certain muscles, but other muscles can be more or less shut off. And in yoga, every muscle gets accounted for. The big ones, the little ones, the ones that rotate us, the ones that keep us straight. And I think that's a process over time for people to get at. And, you know, I think back, like when I first started yoga, I was like, oh, this is really hard, and I like the hard workout, and I feel happy when I'm done. And it didn't take me long because it was so different, but it made me want to start exploring it more. And like, why is this practice so different than any other kind of physical activity? You know, like, I'm happy when I'm done biking, and I feel like it's my ultimate checkout. But with yoga, it's the ultimate check-in. And I think sharing that aspect, although, you know, we're not always ready to want to go to that check-in right away, and it's a little bit of, you find the teacher when you're ready for that lesson. But it's certainly offered every class, and sometimes we're sometimes we hear it, sometimes we don't, depending on what's going on in our own lives and what we need that day.
Yeah. One of the things, there's a couple things that come up for me around that. One is the sort of integrative strength that you're building with yoga, that it's not just that you're working your legs or you're working your biceps, but you're actually trying to incorporate how all of those things work together as a whole. Because while it's true that we are made up of individual parts, so to speak, there's something about the sum of the parts that is more than just what we can do by adding up that sum. So there's that piece. And then there's also this exploration you talked about of going into different ranges and working with different muscles in ways that, like we have these bodies, essentially for most of us, for the most part, kind of like once we're, I don't know, 22 or something. Some of us a little earlier, some of us a little later. There's almost like this ticking clock of it starts to wear down. And I think one of the great things about yoga is, and this is where I'm really curious to pick your brain around like your physical therapy orientation that you bring to it. Because I think a lot of people would hear that and they would think, oh, then the yoga is going to be kind of wimpy, or it's going to be like, you know, and anyone who's taking your class would know that's not the case. But I think what I would steer people toward is this idea that I think is similar with physical therapy, not being an expert in yoga, which is, so we have these bodies, they're kind of wearing down, but they rebuild themselves pretty well if you know how to help it rebuild itself. And that oftentimes comes from this hitting a sweet spot between not pushing things beyond their boundary to where you're going to make it wear out sooner, but also playing with that edge, because it's at that edge is where the body starts to rebuild itself stronger. And it's in that sweet spot that you can become resilient, where, you know, I don't know how many of us are going to be like this, but there's like the 90-year-old yoga teacher on Facebook who's like bending in circles and stuff. But, you know, at least maybe we can get closer to that as we age and still maintain a kind of resilience that comes with playing with those little edges and hitting the sweet spot with it.
Yeah, most of my population that I work with now is elderly. And I really get to see the truth of how people have lived their lives and how it shows up as we age. And whether people have stayed physically active and even what kinds of physical activity that they've done. And I think as we get older, like we get the information of where we are in space from our joints, from weight on our joints. And as we get older, that information change going up and down our bodies to our brains gets slower. So when you hear people having big falls, oftentimes they'll be falling before they even know that they're falling and just slam down. But just because that information change moves slower doesn't mean that it can't be trained, and that it can't, that slowness can't be pushed out. So with yoga in particular, because we're so aware of where our bodies are in space, and we're thinking about it, and we're asking our body to move in multiple directions at one time, and we stand on one leg while we're still and while we're moving, we're keeping all of those chains active and mobile and alert. So that I've had so many yoga students talk about near-miss falls, like on the ice or walking their dog, of all different levels, and how they were able to catch themselves because of yoga. And I think that knowledge background influences what I offer in class, because we unfortunately cannot escape aging, but we can certainly influence how it may look for us. And by, talking about, how that information change or exchange slows as we get older, and that kind of comes at around 50, like 45, 50. But it doesn't mean that we're lost causes. There's always something we can do to help ourselves be more mobile and strong in this world and more able so we can do what we want to do. And even when like the balance part of class, I think lots of us start bad self-talk when we're trying to do a balance pose. If we don't stick it, like it's some kind of gymnastics competition. But, yeah, exactly. But all of those little wobbles on our feet and moving around is part of us learning how to hold on to our balance and learning about where our bodies are in space, and it's keeping all of that alive and well and helping us. And to me, it's kind of crazy, like, why do, when we start to lose our balance, why do we reach out in one way? And it's this equilibrium response we have in our bodies that is just a reflex, and we don't even have to think about it. Our bodies are trying to help us to stay upright. And that's so cool. Mm-hmm. And that kind of stuff, I think, is really fun to give little tidbits of during class without, going into a long lecture.
Yeah. Well, this is the long lecture portion of yoga. Yeah, I like how you put that. I've never actually heard that angle on yoga as a anti-aging, so to speak, process before. So yeah, as you're describing that, I was pretty intrigued because I haven't heard that. And what it sounds to me like you're saying is that while it's true that our kind of reaction time, how we're orienting in space, that window can lower as we age, but within that window, there's like a floor and a ceiling, and we can always stay near the ceiling. Mm-hmm. Which might even, in some cases, that ceiling moving to the ceiling might actually be an improvement over our early adulthood floor, in terms of that. And I liked how you described too with the balance thing, because a lot of times people think learning, they think of like school, like I'm memorizing facts and it's this logical process in here. And the thing with balancing, it's not so much like I'm thinking like, oh, when this happens, I do this, although that could be part of it. It's a little bit more, just by being in that wobbly space, my reflexes continually retrain themselves. Because I think one of the things that I've noticed gets me as I age is my model of my body and how it reacts is a little behind where it actually is. And yoga is like a constant like updating the software of and in that balance moment, it's like the nervous system is getting this update, right, on its reaction times and how it adjusts. And it's all reflexes, but the reflexes are learning in that space.
It's a little power jolt. Yeah, if there's any fountain of youth, it would be yoga. Interesting story I talked about in class this morning as we did on the floor, the half moon stretch and just stretching out, one side of the body and then the other. in how yoga influences me as a physical therapist, I have this whole other toolbox from yoga that I can offer my patients. So I had a patient who was 89 and she's teeny tiny and has severe scoliosis that she's pretty much bent to her side almost at a 90-degree angle. And because of yoga, I was able to teach her that stretch on her bed, and it was the only thing that gave her pain relief. And for all of us to stretch and to, I mean, we stretch and strengthen at the same time in yoga, which is also different from most other forms of physical activity, that the building of those two things together gives us a whole toolbox as we move through our lives to try to help ourselves heal or to prevent injury and to help others. You know, lots of students talk about how they share with their family, oh, do this, or, you know, do this yoga pose if you're feeling tight or whatever. I think every day I think about what would I feel like if I didn't do yoga. I can't imagine what I would feel like if I did not do yoga.
Yeah, it's like if you ever go 4 days or a week, maybe you're sick or you're traveling, and it's like you finally get back to a practice and you're like, holy crap, that's what it's like.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and I think, I mean, my idea now is to be in great shape and to be strong, but to never get injured, you know, as much as possible, to really right size my practice and biking and so that I never have to stop, because as we age, that healing from injury just takes so much longer, and it's just no fun. You know, it's just the best.
Yeah.
So.
And maybe to some degree here and there that's unavoidable, but I think that underscores just the importance of practicing in a way that takes time, that's mindful, not just so you don't injure yourself, but so that you can actually build the tools of resilience that will make injury less likely down the road. And I think one of the things that I appreciate about your class, because I remember you'd always teach this Friday evening class at the studio, that I would come in when I was in the middle of yoga teacher training, that I would come in and crash. And one of the things I would always appreciate about your class is just like the way in which you develop slow strength through the class in a way that does, I don't think anybody's going to come to your class and feel like it's easy to do, even like weightlifters, because of the fact that yoga is going to pursue this integrative strength, meaning like you might have really strong biceps and chest, but how strong are you between your biceps and chest?
Exactly.
Like, so, you know, it's going to challenge anybody. It's not going to be wimpy, but there's a slow, steady build that you have that I think really emphasizes building this connective overall resiliency through the body, where it can take some falls, can take some things that are a little off, and still bounce back quickly. And so I think, yeah, to me as a teacher, you embody that sense of how yoga is important as we age, and being able to maintain and build up as much of that resilience as possible, because our wiggle room for it gets less and less as time goes on.
Yeah. One of the, this past week, a yoga student of mine talked to the whole class at the end of class, and mentioned the story of a woman who had turned 104, and to celebrate, she got up and down from the floor 104 times. And I was like, holy cow, And that's something I actually do in all of my classes is invite people to get up and down from the floor without their hands, because we lose that. And so last week at the studio or at Main Street, I talked about that woman, and I promised I would do my age before I see them again on Sunday, and did it on Wednesday. And it was not as painful as I thought it was going to be, but it becomes cardiovascular. And like to think of, I have people, close friends who are younger, who can't squat down. And, that's surprising. Like, we should all be able to do that for a long time. So.
Yeah, I think that's one of those areas where we talked about that sweet spot earlier, and there's some things that we lose because we wear things out by pushing it too hard, and then there's other things, I think, like the squatting, where we've lost that because we haven't invoked the body's natural ability to rebuild itself at those ranges, because we're never going there.
Yeah, very much so. I think, with my classes, I do try to be very intentional in giving. I think my classes are hard, but they're not fancy.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not asking people to put their, legs behind their head and extreme bits of flexibility. So I want people to come away feeling that they've been very challenged, but in a very doable way.
Yeah.
And to think about, like, we hold poses for a good while in my classes. And, when you hold a pose for a while, it becomes mental, and you have to figure out, we all have to figure out, am I going to come out of this? Am I going to stay in this? What's helping me stay in this? Is it just sure will? Or is it that I'm, getting deeper into my breath, and I'm changing my focus from just that fit of strength to more surrender in the pose? And then all of a sudden you feel like you can stay a whole lot longer, because you're no longer fighting with your muscles.
Yeah.
And I love that interplay then when, we're talking about it a little bit in class, and you can see different facial expressions, and hopefully people laugh a little bit at we laugh at ourselves. And yeah, it's a gift to be able to teach yoga. I feel very, very lucky.
Yeah, I feel lucky to have you at the yoga studio. I think your class very much embodies what you stated. Like, I like to tell people that the quality of the yoga that you're doing is commensurate with how it affects your life. And when it comes down to it, do we really need to be able to bend in pretzels? Do we have to be able to do a full split to have a better life? Is that often useful? I think for most people, no. I think what is useful is having resilience in your body, being able to feel good in your body, being resistant to injury in your body. Like, those are the things that count the most. And yeah, I think I really like the approach and the technique that you use to get to that place where it is, if people are regularly practicing in that way, it does lead to giving a lift in life.
Well, thank you. Um, and as you know, too, that when it comes down to it, I mean, the physical practice, yes, is important, and it's important for us to stay strong and mobile. Um, but in yoga in particular, if it may not happen, within the first few months of yoga, but what we do on our mats really has to, eventually, and it does, and it needs to influence how we are and how we approach the world off of our mats. And I think it helps to teach us to pause and figure out a response rather than react. And we do that by holding the warrior two for 6-8 breaths, because we have to figure out how we're going to respond to what our muscles are telling us. And I think that interplay and then taking what we've learned by being in our bodies with our breath off of our mats is what really is transformational in our lives and ultimately in the world. Because if we're happier people, that's going to spread, and that's really all we can, ultimately that's how we change the world.
Yeah. I mean, I like the physical approach, and I like the way that you emphasized breath earlier, where if I can draw this out a little bit, maybe for someone who hasn't had this experience with breath, where you're talking about like you're in a pose, and it's like, what's keeping me in this pose? And a lot of times for most people, when you're first starting, what's keeping you in the pose is you're going into fight, flight, or maybe even freeze. And what I think like a good class that's going to emphasize breath like yours is going to do is invite something other than fight, flight, freeze to keep you in the pose. And that starts from your breath, like the normal reaction when things get intense, because it's part of our survival wiring is to go into fight, flight, freeze. But if you can deepen your breath can resist that fight, flight, freeze response. And you're actually training yourself to, in moments of intensity, to not go into fight, flight, freeze. And I think that's a directly translatable skill into life, which is whether the intense moment is meeting with your boss, or the intense moment is something non-physical. The nervous system in some ways doesn't see the difference. And so physically training yourself to be with intensity and through breath, not go into fight, flight, freeze, is a very translatable response. It sometimes takes about a good year of practicing that way, but most people I know that have practiced that way regularly find it as a directly transferable skill.
Completely. In my other job as a physical therapist assistant, that ability to stay in my breath and while someone else may be in fight, flight, or freeze mode, my ability to stay centered and breathe helps me to stay present with them so that they can move beyond that initial reaction and get to what's really going on and what's important and whatever they need to do. And that, because I walk into lots of different situations because I go into people's homes, and you never quite know what you're going to walk into. And in fact, sometimes I see every family sausage being made because it can be pretty surprising. But I'm just there with them, and I'm there with them. I'm able to be there with them because of yoga, and to not stand in judgment, to try to understand them more fully and help them move, or hopefully help them move a little bit forward. You know, I'm not going to be able to go in and cure someone or change their whole life, but I can help them that hour, and hopefully it creates a path. And that's all we do as teachers too.
All right. We've talked about physicality, aging, playing with the edges there, with breath, how that translates into life. Talked a little bit about your class and style and what you bring from your previous experience to that. I think we've got a pretty complete conversation here. Is there anything else you want to say for folks who might be watching to look out for in your class or know from where you're coming from?
I think maybe the only other thing is, you know, yoga is deep and all that kind of stuff, but it's also like lighthearted and we can joke around, you know, that it doesn't have to all be so serious, and that it's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if these talks almost like mislead people a little bit, because it might not be that interesting a talk if we're just joking around for half an hour. But
That's true.
But it doesn't all have to be this way.
That's true. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tammy. At least as of the time of this recording, Tammy is teaching the Sunday 9:45 a.m. class at Main Street Yoga Center, and we're delighted to have you having a regular class with us, and I think people are really going to like what you have to offer.
Well, thank you. I love being there.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.